Sure, Shannon, whatever you say.
Fine.
I'm going to invite you after the talk. You can come by my desk. I have a table in the artist area right under the big E, so I can show you the pictures. I'll give you a brief background. I was a kid. I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, a long time ago, and I was an art kid. I went to the art museum every Saturday for years and years, and went to the Art Academy in Cleveland. Went to college at the University of Cincinnati in industrial design. So if you're an artist and you want to make some money, my art teacher advised me to become an industrial designer. So that's what I did. I went to UC for 5 years and graduated with a BS in industrial design. And got hired on at Kenner. So I'm going to just be talking, and as I say, we'll talk about I can show you the visuals that go along with it later. But I got hired in 1972 full-time at Kenner, and worked on a lot of stuff, spirograph and Play-Doh and things like that. And a few years into that, they started what we called preliminary design at Kenner, which was where we looked at mostly TV scripts, inventor products, and new materials, looking for toy ideas. So it was a very creative area. And our charge was to come up with the next best thing. So we were in charge with all kinds of things. And the one that I was working on first was $6 Million Man. The TV show. It was the first time that Kenner got into licensing, and the TV show was designed specifically to be a toy product. It was at that time in TV, shows started in September. They usually had at least 13 or 26 weeks of TV shows scheduled, and they went through December, right through the Christmas season. So that was what we were looking at mostly. We looked at The Man from Atlantis and some other TV shows, looking for another boys product that would follow up on $6 Million Man. As a kid, I was a science fiction fan, not nearly as big a fan as the people I meet at these conventions. They're the fanatics, some of them. So I really enjoy meeting all these people, but I'm not nearly as into it as some I've met. But I was a science fiction fan. I liked Star Trek, Space 1999. And when I was in college, I had seen George Lucas's first movie, THX 1138. If you haven't seen it, you should check it out. But it was his post-apocalyptic view of the world that he used as his thesis film getting out of film school. So I saw that and stored that away. That was 1971. Then I'm working at Kenner, and things are moving along. George Lucas did American Graffiti. That was his big break in the 20th Century Fox studio, and really put him on the map, along with some of the other big directors. And in 1973, now I'm doing it from memory, because my book helps me because it has dates on it. In 1973, there was I'm sorry, that's American Graffiti. In 1976, there was a new magazine called Starwars. I don't know if anybody, a few people with gray hair, but Starlog was started in 1976 in August. They had their first issue, and the second issue was in November. And I read Starlog and looked for all the stuff that was going on. And in that issue, there was a very small blurb about Star Wars and 20th Century Fox linking up with George Lucas for a new science fiction movie. So I kind of stored that away, and I was like, I'd like to see what he's doing with that, especially after American Graffiti. So by luck would have it, February of 1977, the script for Star Wars came into Kenner, and a book of black and white photographs, and we got a Polaroid of an X-Wing and a TIE fighter. And then we came into preliminary design, and the question was, who would take that home to take a look at? And I was, that's mine. Because I knew George Lucas and knew that, you know, I knew there had to be something there. And I got to go home that evening and read through the script, look at the black and white photographs of the live action, brought it back the next day to my boss and said, go in your office, lock the door, spend 2 hours, you gotta read this because we gotta do it. I was just convinced from the first reading that it was something special. Now the hard part is convincing management in a toy company that like to do business between September and December, that a movie opening in a couple months was a good idea. It had 3 things going against it. One, it was a movie. 2, it was opening in May. And the worst was it was science fiction, which for toy companies, there'd already been a few flops. So it took a while, but because we were in preliminary design, they let us have our head. In some respects, they let us, if you had a passion for it, which I did, they said, well, okay, if you can convince us, you know, we'll give you some time. So they gave us time. I got on an airplane not too long after that and went out to LA, met with the marketing people at Lucasfilm. I got to do this, it was the Hollywood thing, you know. I was a kid from the Midwest. I was 27 when I started. I got to go out to LA for the first time. Got to rent a car for the first time. I never, you know, I was like, this is pretty. And got to drive to Universal Studios. That was before it was an amusement park. And got to go up to the booth with the guy in the clipboard you see in the movies. And you look at the clipboard and found my name, and oh yeah, you can park your car over there in their bungalow, whatever it was. And it was the lot was built around an old neighborhood, and they had this nice little old craftsman bungalow that was set up as their office. And I got to go through Joe Johnston's drawings and photographs and things that they hadn't sent us. And it was just me in a dining room of this house going through all this paper and looking at what they were doing. Then they said, do you want to see dailies? They're shooting down at, and they had a ILM, and like, Industrial Light Magic started in Van Nuys, California. And if you saw the Netflix thing, that warehousey looking building was actually their studio. So I'm like, do I want to see dailies? Yeah, that one. So we drove to Van Nuys, got to that building, and we go in and there's Death Stars and X-Wing fighters and TIE fighters on model stands, and walk through the corridor. And it didn't happen exactly like they did on television, but I walk into the store and get introduced to people, and because they've been shooting for days, and the line in the show where they say, oh, you should have been here yesterday, we were blowing up the Death Star. Was true. But when I got let in, I went into a room where they showed dailies, which was basically a big room, about half the size of this, that had a bunch of old couches and a projector and a big screen. And I sat down with people piled in the room, and they, run the film, and the lights go down, and the screen lights up, and it's like, I'm looking, and there's a big black screen, and down in the corner, there's a few flashing lights. I don't even remember what color they were, but there were things happening in the corner. The lights go back up, they say, hey, great job, and they all leave. And I'm like, where's that TIE fighter? So that was my experience with dailies. If I'd been there the day before, it would have been really exciting, because they were blowing up pieces of the Death Star, driving, it was very low tech at the time, so they had a pickup truck with a camera mounted on the back and drove by and things blew up. But that was my Daly's experience. And then I got to go back to Cincinnati and start working, because I was charged with kind of spearheading the design end of it, coming up with the dolls and the characters that we're going to do. So my reading of it, what I wanted to do the X-Wings and TIE Fighters, all the things that were described, the Y-Wings and things. So we couldn't do that practically unless we did figures. So they started out, we needed to cobble together some things to show to management, and then later on to 20th Century Fox and Lucas. So I was out looking at the now defunct Toys R Us, looking for things I could use to kit bash figures for our first line. And that's where the Fisher-Price Adventure people came in. They were the right size to at least get started. And I chopped them up and carved their heads and added new fabrics and stuff to make the first models. And that started with X-Wings. We really didn't have very much information, so when you look at the prototype photographs that I have, we didn't really know the proportions of the things, so it was kind of looking at the perspective drawing, trying to figure out how to make it look right. So all that stuff got packed up. The first trip I made out, again, was to 20th Century Fox in March with a truckload or a station wagon full of product stuff that we had just put together to try and give 20th Century Fox the confidence that Kenner would be a likely place to go. They'd already been turned down by Mattel, Coleco, and Ideal, so a whole bunch of management people at other companies did the same thing ours was doing, in saying that it's opening in May. It's a movie. By the time we get product out, because it took 52 weeks usually. The general rule of thumb was from the time you start to the time you have it on the shelf, it's 52 weeks. So they'd all passed, luckily. Because I had, so then the first trip out with product to 20th Century Fox, my boss Dave Okada and I landed in LA and rented a station wagon. We looked a little like a family vacation because we had big boxes of stuff we had been strapped to the roof of the car and pulled up to the Beverly Hills Hotel for our night before we went to 20th Century Fox, and got there and they said, we don't have a room. Yes. It was the night after the Oscars, and people had stayed over, so we didn't have a room, so they set us up in this little boutique hotel near that we pulled up this very chic place, and we had this station wagon full of junk. Go Oswald. So they take all that stuff in the hotel, and next morning we have to pack it all back on and get to 20th Century Fox. So we went through all of it. We went through our presentation, and they were I think they were convinced, but that was, I got to make a presentation to Alan Ladd, who was running the show, and Mark Pevers, who was in the show on Netflix. So the next step was to convince Kenner too. So they started negotiating, going back and forth, talking about deal points and what we were going to do and how much they were going to pay Lucas. And in April, we they were getting pretty serious. And they invited Kenner to come out and see the movie for the first time. So on May 2nd, just little old me went to San Francisco to the market research showing that they had. They picked an audience, they had all the demographics set up, they had kids, they had teenagers, the whole thing up to 35. I think they probably had some people in their 50s and 60s. And they had been in the theater to get everything tweaked. The speakers had all been replaced, and the subwoofers were in, and the lights go down. And it's hard to describe, but that when the blockade runner comes over your head in the U-boat, it's like, oh, that's pretty. Your eyes get a little wider. But when the destroyer comes over, and they have the subwoofers, the whole floor is just, everybody's vibrating, and you could practically hear the air being drawn out of the theaters, and we were like, and then from then on, it was just, nonstop. And at the end, it was the first time I'd been in a theater with the entire theater stood up and cheered.
Oh.
So you knew that there was something happening. And I know it's hard to imagine, but I had to find a payphone. I think it's really hard to find them now, but so I had to find a payphone to call back to Cincinnati and tell them, "You can't believe what I just saw. Why didn't you come here? You should have seen it." So then they invited me to come down to the second showing, which was the next day, and they did it at Paramount Studios, and that was for the press. So I had seen it twice in the beginning of May. So I knew where we were headed. I was really convinced, and what really pushed the Kenner people into it was the 6 pages in Time magazine with a banner on the front of the cover saying best film of the year. It really made the people, the management that were talking about the deal feel a lot better when Time magazine was like touting, this is going to be the best film of the year. So then it was just nonstop. Then that's when all the stops were pulled out. Lots of people started working on things. The models that the kind of crude wild models that we put together were turned over to engineering and design to be turned into production product. And then I was kind of the liaison between Lucasfilm and Kenner Products, and got to, I looked at materials, sent them back and forth. I luckily was on the receiving end of every product that was developed for Star Wars by other vendors, and it really took off from there. And I got to see lots of stuff early. And then the next step after, there may be questions about stuff. I worked on the first 12 figures. They were kind of my babies, and the X-Wing and TIE Fighter. And I worked on the Death Star playset and a lot of other things, the land speeder and a lot of the other stuff that was developed by other product designers in prelim and in production. And then once that all got started, I didn't work on any more action figures until Boba Fett. Because it was a secret. They were going to let us have one figure ahead of the movie, the second movie. It had to be kept, in-house and kind of quiet. So my trip, I went with my boss out to Lucasfilm again in San Anselmo before the ranch and all that, and met with George and Gary Kurtz. And they had an actor come out, and I got to take the photographs of the first costume that we used as the basis for the Boba Fett. So it was that's this trip. I always tell people my trip of most regret. So it was great to see the Boba Fett and get started on that, but my boss Dave Okada and Gary Kurtz went off to talk business stuff. I don't know what they were talking. They were off somewhere. And George and I were left alone in his office. I met his dog, Indiana. Actually had lunch with Indiana. And so I had an hour alone with George Lucas, and I'm looking around, and he has a Buck Rogers ray gun, little plastic case on the wall. And he's got this painting on the wall. It's an old Frank Frazetta cover. It's a big black Viking with big horns, and he's on this giant black horse. And I was like, I've got that poster in my office. He's got Frank Frazetta's original painting. So we're bonding over it. It's like, this is so cool. And then we talked, he had a partial interest in a comic book store in New York. A friend of his from college had this comic book store. Probably had some of the comics that were out for sale here at the thing. And so we're like chatting and petting dogs and having a great time, talking about all this stuff and how great the movies are and things. And my biggest regret was I had a whole hour or more with George Lucas. I forgot to ask him for a job. After I got over it, it was like, I should have told him he needs a toy designer working out here. So, but I still had a great time doing Star Wars. And then my last trip related to Star Wars was to England for the second movie. I went out to see the sets at Elstree Studio for the Hoth. We saw the Hoth hangar and saw Yoda and Tauntauns. So it was, at that time, the product manager, Jim Black, and I were on the trip.